Shalom and welcome back. This week's Torah portion is a portion of Pinchas. And in last week's portion, we learned that the Midianites were trying to entice the Jewish people into idolatry, and they were unsuccessful. So what they did was they sent out their women out to entice the Jewish men, and after seducing them, they would entice them into idolatry. And it was quite successful. In fact, one very, very prominent Jewish man named Zimri, who was the leader of one of the tribes of Israel, was having relations with a Midianite princess named Cusby, and everything seemed very good and fine until Pinchas, who was Aaron's grandson, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Cohen, Pinchas was Aaron's grandson, stepped forward and saw what was going on. And he turned to Moshe and he said to Moshe, "What's the halacha in a situation like that? What should we do?" Moshe blacked out. He had no idea. I don't know. I don't know. And he turned to God, and the answer that God gave him was Kanayim Poginbo, that in situations like this, zealots have the right to act. And what did he? He took a spear and he killed both of them. He murdered both of them. We are told that the Chachamim of the time, the wise men of the time, were opposed to that. How can you do such a thing? That's not what we're supposed to do. Not to say that what they did was right, but to kill them, we certainly wouldn't do that today. And they shouldn't have done that then. And the Chachamim were ready to put him in cherem, to put him in excommunication, so that no one would have anything to do with him. But God intervened, and God said no. In fact, what Pinchas did was the right thing at the right time. And as a result of it, the plague that afflicted the Jewish people stopped. And Pinchas was rewarded with the priesthood forever. What was called uh, was called the Kahuna Olam. The priesthood was forever. Before that time, just because your father was a Kohen didn't mean you were going to be one. Aaron was a Kohen because God made him a Kohen. Elazar was a Kohen because God made him a Kohen. But nowhere did it say that Pinchas would have to be a Kohen after. But since Pinchas did this very heroic act on his own, God himself rewarded Pinchas with the Kahuna Olam, with the everlasting priesthood. So apparently God intervened and said, Pinchas, what you did was the right thing. It was an amazing thing because nowhere was the halacha that way. The halacha did not say that that's what you're supposed to do, but Pinchas went ahead and did it anyways. It's interesting that this parsha comes just before Yud Beis Tammuz. Sometimes it comes in the week of Yud Beis Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, the 12th of Tammuz, is the anniversary of the liberation of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe from communist imprisonment in 1927. And he suffered terribly under communist rule by being imprisoned and suffering so much for spreading Judaism in Russia during that very, very difficult time during Stalinist rule. And he suffered very hard. His name was Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, Joseph Isaac Schneerson. He was the father-in-law of the Rebbe. Interestingly, the name Yitzchak is the same numerical value, the same gematria as Pinchas, the same numerical value. So obviously Yitzchak has something in connection with Pinchas. Not only that, but Pinchas descended on his mother's side from Yosef, from Joseph. So the previous Rebbe definitely had a connection with Pinchas through Yosef and through Yitzchak. And what was that connection? The connection was that the previous Rebbe lived at a time where the rabbis and Jews, religious Jews, were being persecuted very, very much. The communists wanted to obliterate religion in any shape or form. And most of the rabbis left. The yeshivas closed down. And the previous Rebbe was one of the only rabbis left in Russia that continued the holy work of spreading Judaism and keeping the Jewish spark alive. Now, he was not obligated to do so. There was no place where it said he needed to stay there and sacrifice his life, which he did for God, for Judaism. He didn't have to do that. In fact, all the rest of the rabbis left. But he did anyways, just like Pinchas really went out on a limb and did what he did, even though he was not obligated to do so. But the previous Rebbe went ahead and did what he did also, without having any mitzvah requiring what he did. There was no mitzvah for him to stay in Russia and to continue spreading Judaism, keeping Judaism alive in Russia. No mitzvah at all. But he did it anyways. And this reminds us of the original Yitzchak who was sacrificed at the Akedah when God told Abraham to take his beloved son Yitzchak and sacrifice him for God at the Akedah. Well, it really wasn't a mitzvah. God asked him to do it, but I'm sure Abraham could have said, "Hey, God, I don't think it's a good idea." But Yitzchak was the epitome of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. And the previous Rebbe was full of self-sacrifice. And Pinchas was self-sacrifice as well. And really, that is the lesson of this week's parsha. That sometimes we need to go out on a limb. Sometimes we need to sacrifice and to do things even though it's not commanded to us, even though it's not required of us, even though it can be very, very difficult times. We're reminded of the mitzvahs that so many Jews kept in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. They lit Hanukkah menorahs. They figured out how to light a menorah and Shabbos candles, and they davened and they found tefillin, and they put them on, even though they did it on pain of death. But nevertheless, they did it. And this is what really kept Judaism alive throughout the ages. That even though we were not commanded necessarily to do that, we did it anyways. There were rabbis who gave up their life instead of eating pork, things like that. Or there are only 3 mitzvahs that they say, Yarog v'lo yavar, you should die rather than do them. Idolatry, adultery, and incest. Idolatry, no, I'm sorry, idolatry, worshiping an idol or worshiping another religion, adultery, having relations with a married woman, or shvichas damim, or murder, killing someone else. If someone comes along and tells you to do any of those things or I will kill you, you are to die rather than do them. But everything else we're supposed to do. If someone comes along and says, I will kill you if you don't eat pork, you eat. If someone tells you, I will kill you if you don't daven, or if you put on tefillin, you don't put on tefillin. So any of these things, they're not mitzvahs. You don't have to do them. But so many Jews have given up their life for these things, which are not obligations. But Judaism and Jewish life and mitzvahs are so precious to us, so special to us, that we decided rather to give up our lives rather than to do them. Next week, we are coming to the 9 days before Tisha B'Av. We are now in the period of the 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, before the destruction of the temples. And during this time, it's been a very difficult time for Jews. And Jewish people over the centuries have suffered terribly during this period in many, many ways. In fact, we just find out, of course, in Miami, the great percentage of people who have died or are missing have been Jewish people. So this is not a good time for Jews. This is not a very good time for us. And nevertheless, Jewish people have held on to their traditions, held on to their religion, and even upon pain of death, and really have stuck with it. That is really the lesson for Parshas Pinchas. That sometimes, even though we are not commanded to do it, nevertheless we do it because we have such love for God and such love for Yiddishkeit and for Torah that we do things even though sometimes we are not even commanded to do them. That's the uniqueness of the Jewish people. Candlelighting in San Diego on Friday night is at 7:42, and I want to wish you all a good Shabbos.